So I've always been a slightly different type of learner, I would say. It would take me longer to understand or comprehend ideas that the teacher would say in school, whether that be in high school or university or even primary school. And for example, if I'm reading a block of text and it's technical, I would actually have to read over it a few times for the words to sink into my brain. And there's a sort of doubt or difficulty in translating the words into something of concrete substance or knowing in my brain. Now, during high school, during university, this thing didn't really affect me too much because, you can just always spend more time practicing, you can spend more time studying, you can spend more time, you can have tutors, you can have things like that, so you can have somebody sit with you and help you get better at the task. But now that I'm a software developer working in a company, and you only have a certain amount of hours in a day, you're confronted with the fact that maybe your job isn't the right job for you. Because depending on your team's configuration, depending on, maybe like for example in my current team, we have everything or a lot of communication is done verbally, it's done very quickly, so people say boom, 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 and they give a lot of technical, they explain things technically very quickly, they have technical discussions together, and most members of the team, everyone in the team can get it very quickly. They've been in the team longer as well. And so there's a lack of beginner focus or beginner focus. It's not like a catering to somebody that doesn't have as much context or knowledge. Furthermore, even if I do have context and knowledge, the lookup time in my brain is longer to actually retrieve that information, because I've noticed that if I have to get something out of storage, even if I've worked on that task, there is a disconnect between that and the word unless I've created a connection. So unless I've sat down and created a connection, it's more in like this confused space of hasn't been created yet, if you call it that. So I noticed this difficulty at work because now, in conversation, you're having a technical conversation, and I'm already the sort of person that requires a discussion, like usually one-on-one, so I can ask questions, so I can say, okay, am I thinking the same thing you are thinking, to allow us to get on the same page in my understanding. Somebody that needs, I would say, a bit more time and potentially have the same thing repeated multiple times, because you need, or I've always found I need repetition to understand, repetition to remember. Now, when I was younger, I always just barreled through it because, I thought hard work is the way to accomplish everything. But as I got older and you have less time in the day, you've got a certain amount of hours and a set amount of hours that are dedicated to work time. You can't just barrel through per se, and I'm not going to put more hours into work outside of work. Now, it's not like I'm failing at work. In fact, I'm doing all right and I'm completing all my tasks and everything like that. I'm definitely meeting expectations. But if I were to advance in this career of software development with my, you could call it learning difficulty, I think that could present a problem. Because if I'm in a situation where I have to be really onto it and understand all the domain specific requirements, all the domain specific pieces of information, and this is what the senior developers in my team are, they're able to understand almost instantly what you say. If you say, oh, I'm asking about this thing, they know all the details, they know how it works, they know the database schema, they know all the considerations. But for me, I can write down these considerations, I can understand the considerations, but there's an aspect where I would have to write it down or put it into storage somewhere, so storage in my computer, writing it down, or storage in my brain and create so-called indexes to look it up, aka trying to remember it through repetition, and having some word that's associated with it, or being able to recall it in a way that is stronger and that is able to come out in the moment. Furthermore, now let's explain another thing I've had this difficulty with, which is, so you're in a conversation, right? In a work conversation, and people are talking very quickly, and I feel like what I was triggered with today, and it's happened a few times, and I've just finally really noticed the pattern properly, which is that if I learn slow, if I don't understand something, if everybody else is understanding something, there's an aspect of me that gets triggered. I feel triggered energy arise, and the triggered energy is coming from this feeling of, you aren't good enough, there's something wrong with you, there's something deficient about you, and because there's something wrong and deficient about you, you're kind of a failure, you're not good enough, whatever. And this is not a pleasant energy to come up. It's almost I'd say it's a type of shame. It's a type of shame energy that arises. And so when that arises, it negatively affects me. Now, and this is a perfect example to explain what happens when my mind goes blank. So I was talking, there was a train of thought, and for whatever reason, my mind went blank. It couldn't move on to the next place. Now it's moving on, it's flowing, right? The conversation's flowing. But what happens when you are in a conversation and you forget what you were about to say? This happens to me every so often. Now this could happen even more in a technical conversation. I forget the detail, I forget something like that. Mind blank. But now there's a pause. Now there's almost in a sense, trigger. The trigger being, oh shit, I forgot. Now I have to, everyone's looking at me. And I forgot what I was saying. So that can be triggering emotionally. And so these two sort of emotional triggers have made me realize, one, the importance of finding an occupation that naturally suits your brain and suits your style and suits what you're best at. I think that's something that needs to be considered. Number two is how difficult it can be to mentally juggle so many things at once, and also how I guess if you think of it like this, when you were younger, and I remember there were always people that weren't that intelligent, but as you get older you go to a company and a lot of people are screened out, so you lose 80% of people, and then in software development and technology you are dealing with the top of the top, right? 1% IQ, very smart people, or even if they aren't 1%, they are certainly at the top bracket. And so you're dealing with this exotic group that's very different to the group that you would be exposed to when you were younger, and that changes your perception of what you see, because you start to see everybody as these hyper smart, hyper intelligent people, when that's not necessarily the reality. But finally, let's go into the comparison game. So because you're surrounded by a certain group of people, you compare yourself to them naturally, and so you look at your deficiencies compared to them, rather than celebrating your own uniqueness, because we all have our own uniqueness, and it's hard for it to come out in a work context. It's certainly hard to be unique and to celebrate that when there is a sense of like you are working at this job and you get your safety and security from the job because of money, and so you need to act in accordance with the norms of the job, even if you are neurotypical. So ultimately, feeling some negative emotions and then even being triggered, there's a few games you can play. The first game is the game of how quickly can I get back to a state of equilibrium. So how quickly can I go from this triggered state to a state of equanimity? How quickly can I do that? Play that game. And I tried playing that game today. The second one is moving back into beingness. So when you can move back into beingness, and I started to do it with self-inquiry. So I felt my ego, and then I felt like, who is that reacting? Like, where can I find it? Where can I locate it? And I couldn't locate it, and suddenly this disturbance, the mental disturbance, kind of faded away, and even the part that was continuing to perpetuate it, that was continuing to create more mental disturbance, also disappeared momentarily. Now it came back, some moments later, and I had to do it again, and it was kind of the cycle between oscillating between beingness, oscillating between not having that ego on so strongly in front of you, and compared to being very triggered. So it was that that oscillation, and I feel like that it was really helpful to bring me back into a good state. And so for me, I think self-inquiry, especially when you have triggers or patterns, emotional things that have been running for so long, and you are identified with them, is the self-inquiry is the thing that really just takes you out of that. Because you can be all good and well if you slowly improve your subconscious mind through like programming and like neuroplastic programming. I'm talking about like your traditional NLP type of shit, and like subconscious rewiring stuff, like techniques like hypno, but I've never done those, so I can't comment on them. Or even like affirmations, right? That's something that like, you keep telling yourself and something, you start to rewire your brain subconsciously to be more like that. So you can think of those, and I feel like those can, like slowly move you in the right direction. But what's going to happen when you are triggered, right? You're like, fuck, there's nothing you can do. You can't force it. You can't, tell yourself the affirmation 10 times. It's just not going to work. So the only thing you can really do in that moment is that self-inquiry, like looking into who is reacting, looking into the reactor, trying to locate the reactor. And the location of the reactor is what I found really helps, because when you're trying to locate it, it's like you're literally feeling in the room. Like, I feel like I'm so much more visual now, and like in my sense perception, but it's like very feeling based. Like I'm like, okay, where is it? And I'm like trying to feel out of space, viscerally feel a space where the reactor is, and then I just can't feel it. And then because I can't feel it, there's also feeling of this ego thing. It just kind of like disappears for a moment. I feel like my visual vision starts to shift a bit as well into more expansion. So that's pretty cool until I start to feel it somewhere else, and it starts to come back or whatever, and I'm just oscillating. Another thing that can be really helpful is if there's any tension, any agitation, any emotion, actually giving it space. So feeling into it and then feeling a vast spaciousness. So even if it's a small point, like this large, like let's say you got a contraction of the throat, focus on the throat, focus on the pain there, the emotion, and then just feel like a vast spaciousness, like infinite spaciousness, like an infinite continuous space in that space. So you look feeling into the space in the space, and you realize that in any sort of little space there's like an infinite and undescribable, you can't quantify it, unquantifiable amount of space that you can't put your finger on. You can't say it's this amount, because that's an abstraction. That's you assigning something to the space. No, like when you feel into it, there's no beginning, no end. It's boundless in a sense. Any single point is a boundless, continuous space. And when you can do that, that's when I think you'll start to get a shift, or I start to get a shift at least. Those were things that I found were really helpful. So just recapping, work sucks sometimes, especially if you aren't necessarily the best suited at it. But now I'm thinking about other career options. I'm moving into something where I'm a space where maybe I'm teaching meditation, where maybe I'm teaching things I'm really passionate about, like the stuff I talk about in these videos. But right now it's not nowhere. It's nowhere near enough to make a living, like 100 subs on YouTube. And I don't think YouTube is the only thing I'm going to do, but I thought about my life purpose and my life mission, and my life mission really is to find creative ways to help alleviate the suffering in the world, because there's so much suffering in the world, and I enjoy creativity. I enjoy trying out different things, and I think there's a lot of opportunity in this space because it's so fresh and so new, and it's really tough as well. Like mental health is really tough, and so applying meditation and applying this path of the Dharma, the Buddhism, to something, I think is something I'm exploring. So yeah, stay tuned for more.